In today's Know the Why, we are going to be looking at addition of fractions, and we are going to be looking at first at the algorithm as how we usually solve these types of problems. And we're going to be using the least common multiple of 4, and it's also called the least common denominator of 4. So we see that the fractions have different denominators. So instead of using 1/2, we're going to use we're going to change it to a fraction that has a denominator of 4. So we multiply it by 2/2 and we get 2/4. And so instead of using 1/2, we're using 2/4. And we're going to add that to the 1/4. And we didn't have to change that because the denominator is 4. So we add it and we get 3/4. When we are looking at adding fractions, students need to know why they need to get common denominators. And so when looking at the 2 and the 4, this tells them that they have 2 equal parts in one whole and 4 equal parts in another whole. So automatically they should see the sizes of the parts are different. And because they have different sized parts, then they can't add them or subtract them. So they need to make the parts the same size. And the way they do that is by partitioning. And so this is what we're going to look at as far as the representation goes. Now, this is something that kids can do if they are struggling, but this is not something that I would recommend that they would spend all of their time on just learning this strategy, because it becomes more difficult to draw representations when the fractions become more complex. So the kids need to be able to use this to make a connection, and the connection to the algorithm, so that they can then rely on this method instead of drawing pictures all the time. And so this one, we're going to model it just to get the connection part and that supporting piece, and then the kids should be able to talk it through. So that first fraction we have 1/2. The second one is 1/4, and we see that the parts are different sizes. And so what they would do is they would partition it. And so the question I always ask first is, can I change my halves into fourths or my fourths into halves? And so with that helps the students to see if they need to change one denominator, or if they need to change 2 denominators or both denominators, or how many of fractions they have. They need to be thinking about the relationships between the sizes of those parts. And so here I see that I can change my halves into fourths. So to do that, I am going to partition my halves into fourths. And so for each half, I'm going to cut it into 2 equal parts. And so for that, I see that 1/2 now is equivalent to 2/4. And so now the sizes of the parts are the same. So now I can add these 2 fractions. So I'll take my 2/4 and I'm going to add it to my 1/4, and I get 3/4. This is why this works. When kids can determine when and why a common denominator is needed, fractions become easier for them.